Have you ever seen someone running away from everything people spend their entire lives chasing? Money, luxury, a perfect wedding? Well, this doctor did when he found a bride, barefoot, breathless, and trembling, running not from love, but from a life she never chose. The evening had begun like any other for Dr. Zayden Hale, a man whose life followed strict patterns, predictable routines, and a silence he had grown comfortable with. After leaving the hospital late, exhausted and emotionally drained, he chose to take the long countryside road home. He often said the quiet landscapes helped him clear his thoughts, though in truth, he simply preferred roads where no one expected anything from him. But that night, the sky was heavy with the scent of an approaching storm, and the road seemed unusually still. It was as if the world were holding its breath, waiting for a story to begin. Little did he know, fate had placed a turning point directly in his path. As he drove deeper into the fading daylight, something white flickered at the edge of his headlights. At first, he dismissed it as a plastic sheet or a stray piece of cloth blown by the wind. But the second time he saw the flash of white, it moved. Staggering, trembling, unmistakably human. His heart clenched. He slowed the car, leaned forward, and squinted at the figure emerging from the shadows. A woman, a bride walking barefoot along a deserted road. Alone, her one elegant gown was torn at the hem. Her veil tangled around her wrist like a broken chain. Mud smeared her feet, her arms, even her face. She walked with the unsteady steps of someone who had been running for far too long. The sight alone was enough to make anyone stop, but Dr. Zayden felt something else too, a strange pull, a sense of alarm he could not ignore. He stopped the car and got out slowly, cautious but deeply concerned. The bride froze at the sound of his footsteps, her shoulders tightening as if bracing for danger. She looked over her shoulder with wide, terrified eyes that carried the kind of desperation he recognized immediately, because he had seen it on countless patients who feared the truth more than the illness itself. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, careful not to get too close. She shook her head, clutching the fabric of her dress as though it were the only thing holding her together. Then, with a voice so frail it nearly broke, she whispered, "Please, I can't go back there." Her words weren't loud, but they carried enough panic to make the doctor's chest tighten. Her body trembled violently, not just from exhaustion, but from fear so deep it had hollowed her out. In that single instant, Dr. Zayden understood something crucial. This was no ordinary runaway bride. She wasn't someone who got cold feet or changed her mind. She was fleeing something dangerous, something suffocating, something that had pushed her to abandon everything: wealth, luxury, protection, and a life others dreamed of, in exchange for a dark road and her bare, bleeding feet. He glanced around, half expecting a car or a group of men to appear, searching for her. There was none, just silence, the quiet before a storm, the kind that warns you trouble is nearby. His instincts as a doctor, his oath to protect, to help, to heal, rose above everything else. But beneath that noble instinct was something more personal, something he didn't allow himself to acknowledge yet, an unspoken understanding of what it meant to run from a life that hurt more than it healed. Gently, he offered her his coat, and she hesitated only for a moment before accepting it, clutching it tightly around her shivering body. Her breath came in short, fast bursts, like someone who had forgotten how to breathe without fear. "You're safe now," he assured her, though the truth was, he didn't know what, or who, she was running from. He only knew that leaving her on that deserted road was not an option his conscience would allow. He opened the passenger door of his car and waited, giving her the space to choose. Her eyes scanned the empty road behind her, then the dark fields stretching into the distance, and finally the doctor's calm, steady face. Something in his expression must have convinced her, because she finally stepped forward, not with trust, not yet, but with the kind of fragile hope a drowning person feels when they see a hand reaching out to pull them from the water. The moment she sat inside his car, the night shifted. He didn't know her name, her story, or the truth she was running from, All he knew was that the universe had brought their paths together in a way that felt too precise to be coincidence. She wasn't just a distressed stranger. She was a moment that demanded a choice from him, and he chose to protect her. What he didn't realize was that this single act of stopping his car, of offering help, would unravel the carefully guarded life he had built. This encounter, unexpected, unsettling, and extraordinary, would become the moment that tied their fates together, long before either of them even understood how deeply their lives were about to change. The bride's name was Aria Vesper, and until that morning, she had been the central ornament of the most extravagant wedding the city had seen in years. A celebration worth millions, attended by business tycoons, ambassadors, celebrities, and every influential person who cared more about appearing important than sincerity. Her wedding venue was a palace-like structure decorated with imported orchids, shimmering chandeliers, and golden staircases polished to perfection. But beneath all that beauty, Aria felt nothing but a sense of suffocation. The luxury around her wasn't comforting, it was suffocating, like silk wrapping tightly around her throat. Everyone admired her dress, her upbringing, her groom, yet not a single soul stopped to ask if she was happy. Not that she would have been allowed to answer honestly. Her groom, Damien Locke, was a billionaire with a ruthless charm and a reputation for getting everything he wanted, whether through power, manipulation, or money. Their engagement had never been a love story. It was an alliance, a merger. Her parents saw it as an opportunity to elevate the family status, to merge their business with Damien's empire. Aria had been raised with words like duty, respect, and obedience. She was taught how to smile gracefully, how to speak softly, how to hide discomfort behind perfect posture, but no one ever taught her how to choose for herself. Damien never truly asked her if she wanted to marry him. He simply informed her in that deep, commanding voice of his that their union would benefit everyone, and that she should be reasonable enough to see it. The signs of what her future would become were everywhere, but hidden beneath expensive illusions. Damien controlled what she wore, where she went, who she spoke to. Her friends slowly drifted away, intimidated by the billionaire's sharp eyes and cold demeanor. Even her parents, once warm and loving, became distant, more focused on Damien's wealth than their daughter's well-being. They saw her discomfort as childish fear, and her disagreements as disrespect. Whenever she expressed hesitation, they responded with scripted reassurances. You'll learn to love him. He can provide you with everything. This is the best life anyone could ask for. But in Aria's heart, a quiet desperation grew like a trapped bird beating its wings against a cage of gold. On the day of the wedding, that desperation finally shattered. The ceremony was scheduled underneath a crystal dome, surrounded by heavy velvet curtains and 1,000 glowing candles. Hundreds of guests waited in anticipation, each more interested in the spectacle than the couple's happiness. A string quartet played softly, their music elegant yet haunting. Aria sat in the bridal room as stylists added the final touches to her appearance. She looked flawless, almost surreal, but the girl in the mirror did not look like someone beginning a new life. She looked like someone laying hers to rest. Her makeup artist smiled at her, unaware of the storm raging beneath her calm face. When the wedding planner entered with a clipboard and chirped, "It's time," a chill ran over Aria's spine. As she took the first step toward the grand staircase that would lead her to Damien, Aria heard whispers. Whispers from guests praising Damien's wealth, comparing brands, discussing power. Their words echoed louder than the music. Then she saw Damien waiting at the bottom, tall and elegant, but with an expression that held no warmth, no affection. His gaze wasn't on her face. It was on her appearance, her presentation, the image she created for him. In that moment, her breath caught in her throat. She realized that if she took one more step forward, she would be surrendering her freedom forever. She would be agreeing to a life where her voice did not matter, her dreams did not matter, and her heart wasn't hers to protect. That realization hit her with the force of a lightning strike. And so, while everyone turned their expectant eyes toward the staircase, Aria turned and ran through the back corridors, through the service hallways, past confused staff who were too stunned to react. She kicked off her heels, letting them fall onto the marble floor with sharp echoes. Her dress tore as she squeezed through a maintenance door that led to the garden. She didn't care. She kept running, adrenaline pushing her forward. She scaled a low fence, stumbled across the fields, and kept going until the wedding venue disappeared behind the trees. The wind burned her cheeks, twigs scraped her legs, mud clung to her feet, but she felt more alive than she had in years. The further she ran, the lighter she became. She wasn't running toward freedom. She was running away from captivity, and she wasn't afraid of the wilderness ahead. She was only afraid of the life she had just escaped. Dr. Zayden Hale had built his life around discipline, control, and emotional distance. 3 shields he relied on to keep his past from haunting him. To his patients, he was the doctor who never faltered, never hesitated, never broke. To his colleagues, he was dependable, brilliant, and absolutely unreadable. And to himself, he was a man whose heart had once been shattered so brutally that he swore never to let emotion interfere with logic again. He had spent years turning compassion into a duty and empathy into a profession. It was safe that way, predictable, uncomplicated. But when he saw Aria trembling on the roadside, barefoot and broken in her wedding dress, something cracked open inside him before he had time to shield it. His first instinct wasn't curiosity, suspicion, or annoyance. It was concern so pure it startled even him. He didn't know who she was or what had happened to her. She could have been trouble. She could have been part of chaos he never asked for. But none of that mattered when he saw the fear in her eyes, the way she hugged herself like someone who wasn't used to being protected. Something about her reminded him of a version of himself he tried hard to forget. The younger Zayden who once reached out for help but found none. She looked like someone who had been running not just physically, but emotionally for far too long. And despite all his vows to keep his distance, he couldn't walk away from her. In the past, he had learned that helping others often came at a cost. Kindness, he discovered, was sometimes repaid with betrayal. Love, in his experience, demanded everything and left you with nothing. Years ago, he had trusted someone with his heart, a trust that was shattered in ways that left scars no one could see. The betrayal had been deep enough to change him forever. Since then, he devoted himself to medicine, to saving lives in the most clinical, detached way possible. He healed bodies, not hearts. He listened to symptoms, not secrets. Yet standing in front of Aria, shivering under the weight of her unspoken story, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. A pull towards someone else's suffering, a desire to protect rather than distance himself. He noticed the small details first, the mud on her dress, the cuts on her feet, the tear stains on her cheeks, the way her fingers trembled when she held his coat around herself. These were not the signs of a careless woman or someone seeking attention. These were the signs of a person who had reached her breaking point. As a doctor, he saw physical exhaustion. As a man, he saw emotional collapse. Her vulnerability awakened something dormant in him, something he thought had died long ago. He spoke to her gently, not because he was trained to, but because her courage, her desperate decision to run from a life that suffocated her, earned his respect. When she finally allowed herself to sit inside his car, Zayden felt a weight settle on his chest. Not the weight of burden, but the weight of responsibility. He knew this moment would change something in him. He wasn't supposed to get involved. He wasn't supposed to care beyond what was required. But some people enter your life like questions you can't ignore, and Aria was one of them. Every instinct he had sharpened into alertness, not in fear of her, but in fear for her. He didn't know who she was escaping or how dangerous the situation might be, but he knew enough to recognize that returning her to that life would be equivalent to pushing her into fire. As he drove her away from the deserted road, he kept glancing at her from the corner of his eye, not out of suspicion, but to make sure she was still breathing evenly. She appeared fragile, but not weak, like someone who had endured too much and was now fighting for the first real choice of her life. He admired that, even if he didn't fully understand it. And somewhere within him, a thought whispered. A dangerous thought he tried to silence. She needs help. But maybe, for the first time in years, I need to help someone. That realization frightened him more than anything in his past. Compassion, once again, was slipping past the walls he had built. And despite his own wounds, despite the secrets he carried, despite every reason to stay detached, he couldn't stop himself from reaching out. Dr. Zayden Hale was a man who seemed perfectly put together on the outside. Calm voice, steady hands, and a mind disciplined enough to save lives even under crushing pressure. But beneath that composed exterior lay a secret that shaped every choice he made, every emotion he suppressed, and every wall he built around his heart. Aria could not sense it yet, but the reason he kept emotional distance, the reason he hesitated when she asked simple questions, and the reason he watched her with a careful, guarded gaze was because he had once lost something far more precious than he dared to admit. And that loss had carved a hollow place inside him he never wanted anyone to enter again. Years ago, long before Aria stumbled into his life, Zayden had been engaged to a woman named Leoris, someone he believed was the embodiment of kindness, loyalty, and warmth. He had imagined a future with her, one filled with gentle mornings, shared goals, and the peace he never found growing up. But what he did not know was that Leora had fallen in love with someone else, someone with more money, more influence, and more charm than he could ever offer. While he worked long shifts at the hospital, saving lives and building a future for them, she was quietly slipping away from him. When the truth finally surfaced, it crushed him with a brutality he hadn't been prepared for. She left without remorse, without apology, and without looking back. What hurt him most was not losing her. It was the realization that he had misjudged her love entirely. That betrayal marked the beginning of the end of his ability to trust. The experience taught him that emotions were dangerous, that vulnerability was a weakness, and that giving someone your heart was an invitation for them to break it. His father had once abandoned their family in a similar fashion, choosing selfishness over responsibility. And when Leora left, Zayden felt that history had repeated itself, proving that perhaps he was destined to be the kind of man others walked away from. So he did what he knew best. He turned away from emotional entanglements and buried himself completely in his work. He became a doctor whose focus never wavered, whose walls never cracked, and whose heart never risked another wound. But the secret went deeper than heartbreak. Losing Leora wasn't the only trauma he carried. It was the guilt that followed. Shortly after she left, Zayden had thrown himself into non-stop work, desperate to keep his mind occupied. During one exhausting night shift, he made a minor medical oversight, not one that cost a life, but one that delayed critical treatment by minutes. He corrected it quickly, but the guilt stayed with him. In his mind, it became symbolic. He wasn't enough. Not for his father, not for Leora, not even in the moments where he was supposed to be perfect. That single mistake haunted him silently, feeding the belief that forming attachments would only distract him from the responsibilities he took so seriously. So he kept the secret buried, letting no one see the weight he carried. His colleagues saw a man who worked too hard. No one knew he was working to outrun memories. This was why he reacted so strangely when he found Aria. On one hand, every instinct urged him to protect her. On the other, a voice inside warned him not to let her into the fragile space he had locked shut years ago. But secrets have a way of shaping how we see others, and Zayden saw something familiar in Arias. Someone who had been betrayed by the people who were supposed to care for her. Someone who was running from a life that promised everything yet delivered nothing meaningful. He understood her fear, not because he had lived the same story, but because he knew what it felt like to be emotionally abandoned. Helping her wasn't just a matter of duty. It awakened pieces of himself he thought he had buried forever. As they drove through the quiet countryside, Zayden could feel the secret tugging at him, reminding him of what he had vowed never to do again: get involved, get attached, care too deeply. Yet every time he looked at Aria, her bruised vulnerability, her strength wrapped in fear, his walls trembled. His secret wasn't simply something from his past. It was a scar that shaped his present and threatened to influence his future. And now, with Aria sitting beside him, seeking shelter without realizing whose heart she was stirring, Zayden feared one thing more than the danger she might be running from, that helping her might force him to confront the pieces of himself he had spent years trying to forget. As the car moved through the quiet countryside, neither Aria nor Doctor Zayden spoke for a long while. Yet silence has a way of revealing what words sometimes hide. In that stillness, something unspoken began to form, an invisible thread connecting two people who had lived very different lives but carried wounds that mirrored each other in haunting ways. Aria's escape from a loveless, suffocating world reflected the same hunger for freedom that Zayden once felt when his life collapsed under the weight of betrayal. She ran from a future she never chose, and he had once run from a past he wished he could erase. Their pain, though different in shape, came from the same root. The people who should have protected them had been the ones to hurt them most. Aria, sitting with her hands wrapped around the doctor's coat, felt strangely understood despite not knowing him. She sensed something in his calm demeanor, an echo of her own exhaustion. His gentleness wasn't the rehearsed kindness she had grown used to in wealthy circles. It felt real, grounded, almost fragile beneath the surface. She looked at him once, just for a second, and caught a shadow in his eyes, a heaviness he tried to hide behind professionalism. It made her wonder who had wounded him so deeply. She was no stranger to emotional masks. She had worn one her entire life. And now seeing a hint of pain in him made her feel less alone. It was unexpected, this subtle bond forming between strangers who didn't yet know each other's stories. For Zayden, the parallel was even more striking. Watching Aria fight to hold herself together reminded him painfully of the nights he sat alone in his empty apartment after Leora abandoned him. She had smiled at everyone except him. She had planned a future without ever letting him see the cracks forming beneath her perfect facade. Aria's forced smile, the way her eyes flickered between panic and composure, brought back memories of his own attempts to pretend everything was fine even when he was falling apart. He could tell from the way she sat, back straight, shoulders tight, hands clenched, that she had been trained to hide her emotions, to never be a burden, to behave exactly as others expected. He knew that struggle too well. But what struck him most deeply was her courage. Leaving a billionaire wedding, escaping a life filled with wealth and control, she had done something he never managed to do in his past. He had stayed in his heartbreak, drowning in guilt and self-blame, allowing the betrayal to define him. Aria, on the other hand, had refused to be caged. Despite her fear, she fought back. Despite her upbringing, she chose herself. Despite everything she was told to believe, she ran toward freedom rather than surrendering to a gilded prison. In her fear, he saw his own. In her bravery, he saw the strength he once wished he had. It humbled him, and for the first time in years, he felt a quiet admiration. Not romantic, not emotional, just a genuine respect for someone who fought her way out. The more he observed her, the clearer their emotional parallels became. She had loved people who didn't protect her. He had trusted someone who didn't value him. She was punished for wanting choices. He was punished for giving too much of himself. Both had been betrayed by those closest to them. Both had learned to carry their pain in silence, and both now found themselves trapped between who they once were and who they needed to become. Even though they barely knew each other, their wounds recognized each other. Pain has its own language, silent, deep, and undeniably honest. It was that shared understanding that softened Zayden's guarded heart, even if he didn't want to admit it. As the car rolled into the quiet town where his small clinic stood, Aria glanced out the window and exhaled quietly, as if finally releasing a breath she had been holding for years. Zayden watched her, noticing how her fear began to shift into uncertainty and then something gentler, relief. In that moment, the emotional distance between them shrank without either of them consciously choosing it. Their struggles weren't identical, but they ran in parallel lines, side by side. And sometimes, all it takes to begin healing is meeting someone whose pain reflects your own. Neither of them said it aloud, but both could feel it. For the first time in a very long time, they weren't alone in their suffering. When Dr. Zayden guided Aria into his small clinic, the place felt worlds apart from the luxurious palace she had escaped. There were no marble floors, no golden chandeliers, no staff rushing to tend to her appearance. Instead, there was simplicity, clean white walls, quiet rooms, the faint smell of antiseptic, and a warmth that came not from wealth but from sincerity. Aria hesitated at the doorway, afraid to take even one step further. Her life had always been defined by places she never chose, rules she never made, and decisions that were forced upon her. But here, for the first time, no one pulled her forward. No one demanded anything. She was free to choose, and when she finally walked inside, it was a small but powerful step toward reclaiming her life. Zayden led her to a chair and knelt down to examine her injured feet. He did it with the gentleness of a man who understood pain, not just physical, but emotional. His touch was steady, but there was a softness in the way he cleaned her cuts, as if each wound carried a story he respected. Aria watched him silently, noticing how his brows furrowed with concentration, how he tried hard not to let her see the concern in his eyes. No doctor she had ever met treated her with such quiet compassion. For years, people had displayed kindness in front of her, but only because of her family name. Zayden didn't know who she was or what she came from. He helped her simply because she needed help. It was a kind of healing she had never experienced before, kindness without conditions. For Zayden, helping her reignited something he had long buried, a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to medical charts or professional duty, but to genuine human connection. As he wrapped her bandages, he felt a strange calm settle in him. He had spent so many years distancing himself from emotional involvement, convinced that caring too deeply would destroy him again. But Aria's presence didn't feel like a threat. It felt necessary. She reminded him that even broken hearts could still recognize the pain of others, and though he didn't fully understand it, he felt that helping her wasn't just about treating her wounds. It was about repairing the parts of himself he had neglected for years. Her vulnerability didn't frighten him. It reminded him that he was still capable of feeling. Later, as she sat on the clinic bed with her feet bandaged and her breathing steadier, Aria finally spoke. Her voice was soft but clearer than before. She told him pieces of her story, not everything, just enough for him to understand why she had to run. She expected him to judge her, to question her decisions, to call her foolish for leaving a life most people envied. But he didn't. He listened with a patience she wasn't used to. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer false sympathy. He didn't try to fix her emotions. Instead, he simply sat beside her, his presence steady and grounding. And in that quiet understanding, Aria felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Someone finally heard her, not as a bride, not as an heiress, not as a perfect daughter, but as a human being. What neither of them realized was that their healing didn't begin with deep conversations or dramatic revelations. It began in small, almost unnoticed moments, in the way Aria slowly stopped trembling as she sat in his clinic, in the way Zayden offered her a glass of water not as a doctor, but as someone who cared, in the silence that settled between them, a silence that wasn't heavy or awkward, but safe. Aria felt her heartbeat slow for the first time since her escape. Zayden felt his own guarded heart soften in ways he hadn't allowed in years. Their healing was quiet, gradual, and unforced, like two shattered pieces recognizing the familiar cracks in each other. As the night deepened and the storm finally broke outside, rain tapping softly against the windows, they found themselves sitting across from each other. Two strangers connected by fate, fear, and a shared longing for something neither could name yet. They didn't hold hands, they didn't speak promises, they didn't share intimate confessions, but in that moment they began healing, not because they needed each other, but because they understood each other. And sometimes, understanding is the first and most powerful step toward becoming whole again. As dawn broke over the quiet countryside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and brimming with possibility. Aria looked out the window, her bare feet now wrapped and rested, and for the first time in years, she felt the freedom to breathe without fear. Beside her, Dr. Zayden Hale stood quietly, not just as a healer of bodies, but as someone who had begun to rediscover the healing of hearts. They had met by chance on a deserted road, yet that chance had altered the course of both their lives. She had escaped a gilded prison. He had opened the doors of a heart he thought forever closed. Together, they realized that life isn't about the safety of walls or the promises of wealth. It's about the courage to embrace vulnerability, the strength to choose oneself, and the grace to help others do the same. Sometimes, the people we encounter unexpectedly are not just companions. They are mirrors, guides, and the catalysts for our own transformation. And in that quiet morning light, as two wounded souls shared a newfound hope, one truth became undeniable. Some meetings are not accidents. Some rescues are not just acts of kindness. They are the very beginnings of redemption, healing, and perhaps even love.